Hey everybody! In this video we're going to take a look at the Lion King 2 for the SEGA Mega Drive, or SEGA Genesis as you call it, in the US of A. Around 1994-95, I was downright obsessed with the Lion King. I loved that movie more than anything. Now, I had everything Lion King, from action figures to video games. I'd watched the movie countless times with my cousin. We knew the movie by heart, for whatever reason. And one of my favorite games at the time was The Lion King for the SEGA Mega Drive. Now, I preferred the SEGA Mega Drive version over the SNES version a great deal, and rightfully so. I still think that the SNES version is inferior. So, when I went to rent a new game, I remember at the store that we had this huge store full of SEGA Mega Drive, of Nintendo games, of Super Nintendo games. They had everything back then here. And I come into the store and the lady there goes, "Oh, you know, we got a new Lion King game for the SEGA Mega Drive. It's Lion King 2. You should definitely check it out because you like Lion King, right?" And I'm like, "Lion King 2? Wow, that's awesome. I gotta have this. I gotta check this out." And I thought it was the weirdest thing I had seen. Now, I can't remember. This was either 1995, late 1995 or early 1996. This is the weirdest thing I have seen. Like, there's obvious, very Chinese atmosphere, yet it is the Lion King. Now, it was very clear to me that this game was not developed by the same companies that developed the original Lion King. However, I didn't understand at the time that it was actually a bootleg pirated game. Well, I guess you can call it a pirated game, but it was an unlicensed game, and this is something I did not understand. So I remember taking the game home, renting it, right, taking it home, and at first thinking, "Oh wow, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Like, why is Simba suddenly in China? Who are all these enemies? This makes no sense, and the visuals are so severely downgraded from the original." So I kept playing it in the sense that, it's so bad it's good kind of way, right? Like, I was actually enjoying it because it did feel surreal even back then to me. Like, I played my share of the game and whatever, and I go do something else or play another game. So the next day comes, the next morning, I wake up and I just cannot wait to play this game again. So I sit down and I start really, really enjoying the game. There was just something so weird, so surreal about the atmosphere. The first level is this really strange kind of cloudy area, and the music started like growing on me. Like, yeah, it has nothing to do with the Lion King movie, but that's what made it special. Problem is, the game started growing on me. Its mechanics, well, definitely flawed, I got used to. So yeah, the jumping is a little bit off, and your momentum when you move is a little bit off. The game makes no sense because you suddenly play as a grown lion, either a grown Simba or a Mufasa, when you collect a star. And then when you get hit, you revert to a little lion cub again, either Simba or maybe it's Simba's kid. I don't know what the developers had in mind. For starters, the areas are very surreal. Each level is very much China themed. Yeah, I was aware that it was poorly made, but it wasn't awful by any means. Visually, the game is pretty decent. I wouldn't say it's overly impressive. I think that instead of making a Lion King game, the developers should have definitely gone with their own unique characters and kept the level designs, kept the level themes, maybe worked on the physics and the controls a little bit more, and created an original IP, because there's a lot of potential here in this game, and there's absolutely no need for the characters to be Lion King themed. This is a good canvas that could have been built upon and could have been created into something very unique and very beautiful. I'm sure that the Chinese have a lot of characters they could have used, maybe from their folklore or from their folk tales, or perhaps a completely original story would have worked as well. But I guess the developers wanted to do a Lion King sequel, and you could see this as some kind of a fan fiction game, I guess. It's a pretty interesting and bizarre thing to experience, especially when you're a kid. Now, as far as gameplay goes, the Lion King 2 for SEGA Mega Drive or Genesis is your pretty standard platforming fare. However, there are some issues. So, for one, the developers tried to replicate the grabbing of ledges, where you pull yourself up if you don't land on a platform and you just kind of get close to the edge. And They sort of did a decent job at it, but it's not very good. So yeah, it can be pretty iffy at times. Like even official games, even licensed games have issues with this mechanic. So it's not surprising to me that an unlicensed game from developers who are probably not overly skilled or overly experienced managed to mess this up, but it's not a huge deal. It still works. There's definitely collision issues there. It's not as bad as some games are, like it's far from it, but it can be an issue. However, it's a good thing that the game doesn't really rely on this too much, and it doesn't try to make you do some heavy platforming, because the developers clearly knew that there were some issues with the jumping, and they were sure not to overuse these mechanics in the game. Overall, the game is pretty easy and very enjoyable to play. When it comes to enemies and hitboxes, you have a very, very short-ranged melee attack, similar to what you would have in the original Lion King when you're adult Simba, and you cannot stomp on enemies. However, given the fact that it's a very forgiving game, even if you have the version where you lose health, the normal version that was from back in the day, it is not a big deal. Like, enemies aren't overly aggressive, they follow certain patterns all the time, so it's not something that you cannot learn. Now, the big difference between the version I have now and the version I would rent back then, and I feel so bad that I never bought it, was that the version back then you could actually die and you were not invincible. However, throughout the years, it appears that new cartridges that they would print out that were not the original print all have this glitch where you're actually invincible and you have infinite lives. And I still keep beating myself up over the fact that I didn't buy it back then, because it was actually pretty cheap. Because that version did not have the infinite lives and it didn't have infinite energy, infinite health, right? So that's something that it would have been very cool to actually own nowadays. So would I recommend playing this game? Of course, I mean, you should definitely check it out. It's not an awful experience to have, and it's a very fun and enjoyable foray into the bootleg or unlicensed game world, and I think these type of games are always very interesting to experience, especially if you can do so on original hardware on a CRT TV. That's why I'm actually recording these videos that way, because I really want you to get that original, authentic feel of how these bootleg games or how these unlicensed games felt back in the day. So yeah, it's not a bad game at all. Give it a shot if you haven't already. It's a good experience. It's a fun experience to have.